Hello, hello, hello everyone. My name is John Sierra and I'm a Tolkien scholar. That means that I'm always learning about the words and the worlds of J.R.R. Tolkien, and I'm here to answer your questions about J.R.R. Tolkien. Whether you have a question about The Hobbit, or The Silmarillion, The Lord of the Rings, anything that you can think of, or even just about Tolkien in general, or the man himself, I'm the one that people generally come to with these sort of questions, and I answer a lot of questions, and I mainly do it on Quora. There is a link to my Quora in the description. Of course, you can ask me a question in the comments, and I try to get to as many of those as I can. I think I pretty much hit like 95% of those questions when I can. But if you want to be featured in a video, ask on Quora. If I think your question is good enough to be in a video, it will be in a video. And we have, I believe, 20 to get to today. Some of them are shorter ones, so I was able to include a lot. Shorter in terms of my answer anyway. We finally hit 1,000 subscribers. And you're probably thinking, that's old news. That was like 2-3 weeks ago, depending on whether you're a member or not. Yes, it was a while ago. But for me, it was just a few days ago. These are all recorded a little bit ahead of time so that the members can watch them early. And yeah, we hit 1,000 subscribers, so you'll notice there's some ads on the videos. I apologize if they're intrusive. Let me know if there's like too many. I'm letting YouTube sort of decide where they are right now, because I do include chapter breaks. They should be put at least natural points, not in the middle of me explaining something. And, you know, it's not like the greatest thing to put ads on the video, I think, because they can take you out of it and whatnot. But if I could make, money just from, enough money, that is, just from memberships to justify all the research and all the work I put into it, then that would be great. But the thing about YouTube is that if you can put ads on your videos and you don't, you actually are setting yourself up to fail, because they are only going to show to people the videos and the creators that they believe are going to make them money. So if you're refusing to put ads on your videos, it kind of buries your channel. Even subscribers will just not get the updates that they're looking for if they've decided that you're just not doing it for them. So like I said, I apologize if the ads are intrusive. Hopefully they're not. Hopefully you guys don't mind just supporting me in that way. You don't have to click on them or anything unless it's something you're interested in, of course. But if you could just watch them, there's usually a skip button. But if you feel like supporting me further, just let them play. Anyway, we have a lot to get to. But I have to say, if you are new to the channel and you like the content, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, turn on notifications, do all that stuff. We don't currently have a goal, because our goal was 1,000 subscribers, and right now, as of recording it, and I know there's going to be like a little thing that I'm going to put on the screen that's going to say actually, because tomorrow it'll be a different number when I edit this video. But for right now, we have, let's see, how many subscribers are we up to right now? We're up to 1,042, which is great. Absolutely fantastic, and the growth has been phenomenal, because out of 1,042, 283, in other words, 25% of that, a little more than 25% of that, was in the last 28 days. So the channel is doing well, views are up, it's just been great. So, but we don't have a goal just yet. Maybe we can do something special for, we'll say 10,000. 10,000, maybe we'll do something special. I'll have to figure it out. I'll have to put my head together with some people and brainstorm it and see what we got. But anyway, guys, let's get to the reading. And I've chosen a little bit of, I'm going to read the first bit of a passage from Sketch of the Mythology, which is one of the things that comes in the novelized version of Beren and Luthien. And if you don't have this book, Beren and Luthien, I absolutely recommend it. I absolutely recommend it. It gives you so much, because you probably know the story of Beren and Luthien if you had read the Silmarillion, but you get all this extra stuff. You get these different versions of the story, some of them quite old. There's all these great plates that come with it, the illustrations. But anyway, yeah, I'm going to read you a bit of a passage from the Sketch of Mythology. The power of Morgoth begins to spread once more. One by one he overthrows men and elves in the north. Of these, a famous chieftain of men was Barahir, who had been a friend of Celegorm of Nargothrond. Barahir is driven into hiding. His hiding betrayed, and Barahir slain. His son Beren, after a life outlawed, flees south, crosses the shadowy mountains, and after grievous hardships comes to Doriath. Of this and his other adventures is told in the Lay of Leithian. He gains the love of Tinuviel, the nightingale, his own name for Luthien, the daughter of Thingol. To win her, Thingol, in mockery, requires a Silmaril from the crown of Morgoth. Beren sets out to achieve this, is captured, and set in dungeon in Angband, but conceals his real identity and is given as a slave to Thu the Hunter. Luthien is imprisoned by Thingol, but escapes and goes in search of Beren. With the aid of Huan, Lord of Dogs, she rescues Beren and gains entrance to Angband, where Morgoth is enchanted and finally wrapped in slumber by her dancing. They get a Silmaril and escape, but are barred at gates of Angband by Carcarus the Wolf Ward. He bites off Beren's hand, which holds the Silmaril, and goes mad with the anguish of its burning within him. They escape, and after many wanderings, go back to Doriath. Carcarus, ravening through the woods, bursts into Doriath. There follows the wolf hunt of Doriath, in which Carcarus is slain, and Huan is killed in defense of Beren. Beren, however, is mortally wounded and dies in Luthien's arms. Some songs say that Luthien went even over the grinding ice, aided by the power of her divine mother Melian, to Mandos's halls, and won him back. Others that Mandos, hearing his tale, released him. Certain it is that he alone of mortals came back from Mandos and dwelt with Luthien, and never spoke to men again, living in the woods of Doriath and in the Hunter's Wold, west of Nargothrond. So I just wanted to read a little bit of that and just sort of comment on it. It's a very, very brief bit from Tolkien's sketch of the mythology as it relates to Beren Luthien, and it's just sort of his notes of this is how the story happened. You notice that it is not quite the earlier poetic work where, Beren is an elf, and Luthien's a fairy, and Tevildo is a major character, and it says Morgoth instead of Melko. But then there's some instances here where you see that it's an earlier version, Carcaros, the wolf, instead of Kachoroth, the wolf. And also, Thu the Hunter is a character that later becomes Sauron. Even the fact that he was named Hunter and not Necromancer is sort of interesting there. And you see the Thu, as in Thu the Hunter or Thu the Necromancer, come out in Gorthuar, which was a name that some of the elves, specifically the elves of Beleriand, had for Sauron. So, and also, it's interesting because we know that Luthien traveled to Mandos after Beren died. She traveled to Mandos, and, but we don't know the method by which. Did she lay down and abandon her body, or did she sail to the west, And considering when the story takes place, she couldn't have sailed to the west because, the Undying Lands were veiled at this time. You couldn't find them, although Tuor found them. But certainly Luthien is sort of the other end of the coin. She's sort of the counterpart to Tuor. They're sort of two ships crossing in the night. Tuor is a man who has no elvish heritage whatsoever, who becomes immortal, whereas Luthien is an elf who has no mortal heritage whatsoever, who becomes mortal. And they're the only two instances of that happening. Of course, there are other elves that become mortal, like Arwen, who is very much like Luthien, becomes mortal, but she has mortal ancestry. She has mortal ancestry because Elrond is half elf. Going back to Tuor, to Elrond, to Amandil, to Tuor. So it's sort of interesting. To think that she actually walked across the Helcaraxa, the grinding ice, as said there. So, I just wanted to read a bit of that. I mean, that's pretty much the whole thing. There's a little bit of a note there after that, but that's pretty much the whole thing. Anyway, we're going to get into your questions. Let's start with the first one, because that's usually a good place to start. Okay, so this first question, this is interesting. This week I got a lot of Gollum questions and a lot of Saruman questions. So here's the first question. This is a Gollum question. If Bilbo Baggins had killed Gollum when he had the chance instead of having pity, which stayed his hand, would the One Ring have quickly corrupted Bilbo and made his life terrible. Yeah, absolutely. 100% yes. The reason that the One Ring never really did too much to Bilbo other than make him possessive over it and make him lie about the circumstances he got it are because Bilbo is inherently a good person. We see this not only in the fact that he did not kill Gollum when he had the chance, but that in lying about how he obtained the One Ring, his lie did not serve to make him look better. It served to make Gollum look better. In Bilbo's lie, Gollum is friendly. He was upset that he could not find the prize that he had planned to give, and he happily led Bilbo out when Bilbo suggested it as an alternate prize. Bilbo did not kill Gollum because of pity, as he put it. It was not a fair fight, as he was invisible and he was armed, and Gollum was not armed, and he did not yet try to harm him. Of course, Gollum was planning on harming him, but Bilbo didn't actually know that at this point. And I don't think that it would have mattered to him. He was not one to kill in cold blood. That was more of a Gollum thing. Bilbo's moral fiber is why the One Ring had such a hard time with him. And if he was the type that would have killed in cold blood, it would have been... The ring would have had a lot more to work with, so to speak. Okay, next question. Okay, so here's a question that came in by request of Banazir, who asks, did Tar Vardamir get a chance between mortality and immortality like his cousins? If yes, would the Númenóreans have allowed an elf king? So, just to clear it up for anybody who's wondering, Tar Vardamir was the second king of Númenor. He was the son of Elros, who was Elrond's brother. And Elros and Elrond, being the children of Eärendil and Elwing, were given the choice of whether or not they would be mortal or immortal. And Elrond chose immortality, while Elros chose Elros chose mortality. So it's interesting because then Elrond's children, he had 3 children, Arwen and her brothers, of course, their older brothers, Elladan and Elrohir, they all had the same choice. They were functionally immortal, but they had the same choice. And we know that Arwen chose mortality. We don't really know what her brothers chose. But what's interesting is that there really is no record of Elros's children being subject to this sort of choice. As far as we know, they weren't. Normally, the way it normally worked was that any drop of mortal blood in your line makes you mortal by default. You're just mortal. Even if your father was an elf and your mother was not, you're not. But a unique exception was, of course, given to Eärendil and Elwing and their children, Elrond and Elros. And, you know, like I said, Elrond's children were definitely given this choice, but there's no record of Elros's children giving any sort of choice. Now, I personally believe that in Elros being given a realm of men that had been gifted extended life by the Valar, he was essentially surrendering this choice for his line. And some people pointed out when we were having discussions about this on Quora that it may be possible that the choice could be inherited if the parent is immortal, but once you're mortal, your line is mortal, and then everybody's sort of like cut off at that point. And it's possible also that there was a caveat at all. I mean, these are sort of all the same answers with different way of looking at it. That in not only do you have to be descended from Eärendil and Elwing, but you have to also have at least one immortal parent, which is basically the same idea. I think, you know, to answer the other part of the question, would the Númenóreans have accepted an immortal, an elf, as their king? Yeah, in the early stages, I think they would. They would have been very happy to have an elf as a king. They were great friends with the elves. But as time went on, they would have become envious of their immortal king, and because he would just be the king, nobody else would come after him because he wouldn't die. So the only way that the line would continue past him is if he sailed to the west at some point, which I think he would have, especially being so close to Tol Eressëa. Okay. next question. In The Lord of the Rings, did the White Council ever ask Saruman about what happened to the Blue Wizards after they vanished, or did nobody know where they went, and they didn't mention where they were going to anyone? So I don't think that they would have asked him that, and if they did ask him that, Saruman probably would have just lied about it. The only member of the White Council that would know of the Blue Wizards for certain would be Círdan, and what he may or may not have thought of them is anybody's guess. He had his opinion of Saruman. He found him to be imposing with a fair voice. He had his opinion of Gandalf, who he found to be the wisest. He knew about the other wizards because he witnessed their arrival in Middle-earth. But if he ever asked about the Blue Wizards, it seems likely to me that Saruman would probably redirect the conversation and assure everyone that he knows exactly what they're up to, which he doesn't, and that everything is fine. Saruman never admitted not knowing something, and he didn't like it when others asked him questions that were outside his bubble of knowledge, so to speak. Okay, next question. So here's a question that comes through sometimes. How come Bilbo did not experience the same effects of the One Ring as Frodo, despite having it for a longer period of time? So, Frodo had the ring for about 18 years, whereas Bilbo had it for about 60 years. So what's the difference here? Why did it weigh so much on Frodo and weigh him down and affect his life so negatively? Whereas Bilbo was, for the most part, fine. Even after 60 years, he was starting to feel, as he put it, thin and stretched, like butter over too much butter over too much bread. Too little butter over too much bread, was the saying. There's a bunch of reasons. I'm going to go over a few of them here. So one reason is that the ring was actually pretty happy to be with Bilbo. He took it out from under the mountains, and he traveled around with it, and this was an opportunity for the ring to possibly get back to Sauron. That's what it wants. It wants to go to its master. It doesn't want to sit in Gollum's pocket in a lake under a mountain for 500 years. Another thing to keep in mind is that Bilbo was not trying to destroy the ring. Frodo is trying to destroy the ring. He's bringing it to Mordor, which you think the ring would be happy with since that's where Sauron is, but he's very open about he's going to Mount Doom, and he's planning on, he didn't get to physically do it, but he was planning on throwing the ring into the fire and destroying it. So, the ring is aware of what's going on around it. It can hear, it can understand, and if somebody's saying that they're going to destroy you, you're going to kind of fight back. Another reason is that Bilbo never went anywhere near Mordor. The ring was more powerful the closer it got to Samath Naur, specifically because that's where it was created, which is probably why Sauron's tower was so close to Mount Doom. Another thing to consider is that Sauron, at the point of The Hobbit and the time period between The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, Sauron wasn't looking for the ring, and he had other things on his mind. And the last thing that I'll bring up, there's other reasons, of course, but this is the last one that I'll bring up, is that Bilbo was not aware of the power of the ring or the nature of the ring, so he didn't think of it as anything evil. And the ring had no reason to let Frodo know that it was evil. It had no reason to sort of, so to speak, to tip its hand and to become more malevolent. And to ruin his life. There are plenty of other reasons, but those are, I think, the biggest ones. Okay, next question. So here is another question about Bilbo and the ring. How is Bilbo able to give up the One Ring so easily, despite carrying it for 60 years, while Frodo carried it for 20 years? Not quite 20, but and almost died trying to keep it. So, I mean, I already talked about the differences between what Frodo was doing and what Bilbo was doing, but I don't want you to think, even for a second, that Bilbo giving up the ring was easy. Bilbo giving up the ring was not only was it not easy. It was one of the most difficult things. He very much wanted to keep it, even though he knew on some level that it was the cause of his woes. Gandalf was there to help him. That's the biggest thing. And he mentioned later that he could have easily have forced Bilbo to give up the ring, but that doing so would break Bilbo's mind and it would corrupt Gandalf as well. So there was a story that Tolkien wrote. It was in Unfinished Tales. It's called The Quest for Erebor, and it takes place during the Return of the King. And Gandalf described that the two most difficult tasks that he ever had in his entire life in Middle-earth both involved Bilbo. The second most difficult task that he ever had was convincing Thorin Oakenshield to take Bilbo with him on his journey. And the most difficult thing that he ever did in Middle-earth was convince Bilbo to give up the ring willingly. So if you think about this, Gandalf is at this point, considering that this takes place towards the end of the Return of the King, he's straight up saying that getting Bilbo to give up the ring was more difficult for him than fighting a Balrog. Now imagine how difficult it was for Bilbo. He's not as strong as Gandalf. So, yeah, it was not an easy thing for him. Okay, next question. Okay, here's a question that came in from Bam Barrow, who asks, what were the creatures of pure flame in the Fall of Gondolin? So in this instance, you're likely you're not referring to the Balrogs. Some other people that got to this question and answered it said they were Balrogs, but I don't think that's what you're speaking about, because they're named Balrogs. They're not referred to as creatures of pure flame, and they were never described in that fashion in the Fall of Gondolin, in any version of the Fall of Gondolin. It was always shadow and flame, and in the Fall of Gondolin specifically, it just said Balrogs. It seems to me that you're describing the version of the story that was in the Book of Lost Tales Part 2. So let's have a look at Tolkien's description. I'm going to read you a little bit of the Book of Lost Tales Part 2 here. Then on a time Melko assembled all his most cunning smiths and sorcerers, and of iron and flame they wrought a host of monsters, such as have only at that time been seen, and shall not again be seen until the great end. Some were all of iron, so cunningly linked that they might flow like slow rivers of metal or coil themselves around and above all obstacles before them. And these were filled in their innermost depths with the grimmest of the orcs and scimitars and spears. Others of bronze and copper were giving hearts and spirits of blazing fire, and they blasted all that stood before them with the terror of their snorting, or tramped whatso escaped the ardour of their breath. Yet others were creatures of pure flame that writhed like ropes of molten metal, and they brought to ruin whatever fabric they came nigh, and iron and stone melted before them, and became as water. And upon them rode Balrogs in hundreds, and these were the most dire of all these monsters which Melko devised against Gondolin. Okay, so from the description, we're talking about, metal and fire. We're talking about some that are pure fire. His smiths, Melko's smiths, they're described in the passage as creatures, and they're described in the passage as monsters. But if you just read the actual descriptions, it seems like they're machines more than anything, of iron and flame that the Balrogs would ride upon, or that the orcs would ride within. And in this version of the story, the Balrogs are not fallen mire. There are a great many of them. Many people have imagined them as being something like tanks, or as close as something like tanks that Melko could create in the world of Middle-earth. In universe, there's something to consider here, that this is a false account of the Fall of Gondolin. And while the events of the story basically happened, the details are greatly exaggerated. There were never any more than 7 Balrogs at the most, not hundreds. Tur certainly did not slay 5 Balrogs in his wrath, and the machines that were described, whether they were called creatures or monsters, they were described as being machines, they didn't exist. reconciling this with the canon version of the tale as told in the Silmarillion, we can assume that the Book of Lost Tales is an in-universe tale told by men, likely men from Númenor. In telling the tales of the First Age, the storytellers of the Second Age exaggerated and embellished the details, most of which they would not know anyway. They were not privy to it. The only mortal present in Gondolin was Turin. He sailed to the west. So, with their limited understanding of Elvish lore, they told their own version of the story. 7 Balrogs became hundreds, and the machines that were described there could have just been dragons, to be honest with you. They could have just been dragons. Okay, next question. Okay, here's one that came in from Kevin Manning, and I like this question. This is a question I get every once in a while, and I always like answering this one. Which stories from Tolkien's Legendarium that have not yet been adapted would you love to see brought to the screen? All of them, of course, but out of all of them, the one that I personally yearn to see the most is The Children of Húrin. Imagine if this story was brought to a much wider audience via a very good film. Let's say it was directed by David Lowery, directed The Green Knight. If you've ever seen The Green Knight, you'd understand that this guy definitely should adapt a Tolkien work. Tolkien himself actually did a translation of The Green Knight. People will line up to see it. I would love this movie to exist. Let's call it The Children of Húrin, a Middle-earth tragedy. And they think they're going to get something like The Lord of the Rings. And then imagine their faces as they walk out of the theater. They're just completely traumatized. All the edgy fans of like George R.R. Martin or like Stephen Donaldson, you know, in the past, they like to claim Tolkien's too light and fluffy. He's squeamish. He doesn't write about the darker side of fantasy worlds. He's not realistic and gritty, which is, to me, I mean, it's fantasy. It's not supposed to be realistic. It's supposed to be the opposite of realistic. It's supposed to be escapism. But then they see that he's already written that type of story just a lot better. I always describe The Children of Húrin as this story that Martin wishes he was talented enough to write. And it has all the edgy elements that they love while still being inherently Tolkien. It's clear in this work that all of these things that are in A Song of Ice and Fire, that are also in The Children of Húrin, are bad. They're wrong, and it shows you the grisly and harrowing results of these sort of acts, all while never attempting to be realistic. It's fantasy. Imagine people seeing on the big screen Morgoth placing Húrin on a mountain of dead bodies and telling him that he is God. Imagine seeing what Túrin's outlaws do, what the Easterlings do, Gwyndor seeing his friend dismembered, and that Túrin's revenge only serves to bring more misery. Imagine the ending. Our hero slays the dragon, yes, but then he literally falls on his sword after finding out that his pregnant wife is not only dead, but was his sister. Imagine cutting to Húrin, still stuck in that chair, grown old and tears streaming down his face. Maybe people aren't ready for this movie. I am. I'm ready for it. Okay, next question. In The Lord of the Rings, what would happen if the Witch King and the other Nazgul flew into Minas Tirith and ordered Denethor to surrender, or just entered his chambers and killed him and his guards, since no man could kill the Witch King? Okay, so, can we just dispense with that? Can we just get rid of that whole no man could kill the witch thing? It's nonsense. The Witch King said at Pelennor, "No man may hinder me." I might have to read that section to you guys next week. I think I will read from The Return of the King, and I will do that section. It's not a statement of fact. It was a boast. He was so powerful in his mind that he could not imagine being bested by men. He had been bested by a man already at this point. Aragorn drove him off at Weathertop. But since then, he had been gifted with additional demonic powers by Sauron, so much so that he thought that he could face Gandalf the White. Then he was stabbed in the leg by a hobbit and stabbed in the face by Éowyn, and that was the end of him. But you might ask, what of the prophecy, right? What of the prophecy? Glorfindel made this prophecy, but what he said was that the Witch King's doom was far off, and it was not by the hands of man. He did not say, men cannot kill the Witch King. He said that, I see his death, and it's far off, and it's not caused by men. This is foresight. It's similar to Gandalf knowing that Gollum was important and that Gollum was going to play a role in the destruction of the One Ring. And the most important thing to remember here is that the Witch King was not present when Glorfindel made this prophecy. So the Witch King did try to enter Minas Tirith, and he was blocked by Gandalf, and he fled because Rohan had arrived, and he had bigger fish to fry. Denethor, at this point, he really had already surrendered, and with Faramir comatose, it wound up being Gandalf that took charge of things. And so if they killed Denethor, that would just be getting him out of the way early, because he dies in the story as it is. Okay, next question. How did Saruman know that a hobbit had the ring? So in this case, he put it together from all of the evidence. Saruman got it together in his head that the One Ring had been found and that it was tied up with Gandalf and the Shire. Firstly, Gandalf had already come to him inquiring about the ring a while ago, and Saruman lied. He told him that he had special knowledge that the One Ring had been washed out to sea and was gone forever. However, when the Nazgul showed up at his doorstep looking for the Shire, which is a place associated with Gandalf, he was, of course, interested. Saruman knew that the One Ring was not lost forever, and that he was actively searching for it himself. He even had a special place of honor in a secret compartment in Orthanc that he wished to house it. With Sauron all riled up and sending out the Nazgul searching for the ring and searching specifically for the Shire, it becomes obvious that Gandalf knew where the ring was and that it was tied up with the hobbits somehow. Now keep in mind that the ring was not as secret as Gandalf would have liked. Bilbo didn't flaunt it openly, but Merry had seen him put it on and vanish at one point, and he knew that Frodo had inherited it. Merry shared this information only with his close friends, Pippin, Sam, Fatty, but if Merry noticed it, it's possible that other people noticed it, and it's also true that Gandalf's increasingly negative reputation in the Shire was due to the fact that Saruman had visited a few times in disguise, and that his mischief wound up being attributed to Gandalf. Saruman was sneaky, he was manipulative, and he was extremely observant. He would have made a fantastic villain if he didn't look like an absolute chump when you compare him to Sauron. Okay, next question. Why did Sauron not use his eye to look at Isildur and retrieve the ring? He was too weak to do this at this point. He was in hiding, and he thought Isildur would have destroyed it. Sauron had been defeated. His body had to be abandoned, and his tower crumbled. He didn't have access to the eye. He had to flee Mordor, winding up in Greenwood. He was so weak at this point due to two consecutive defeats, the Akalabeth and then the Last Alliance. His army had been routed, his tower had been brought down, and in these moments he believed that the ring was gone. Later he would recover, and after meeting Gollum, he realized that not only was the ring not destroyed, but that it was so seductive to others, because he didn't create it for others. He had no idea what effect it would have on people. And he realized that it was so seductive that no one could willingly destroy it. But for the moment, Sauron was focused on hiding after a defeat, as he usually does. The only reason that he attacked Gondor before he recovered fully was that he was incensed that anyone from Númenor survived the Akalabeth, and he wished to fully wipe out the Edain, who were now the Dunedain. And he tried to do so before they could gain great power. He, of course, did not count on their alliance with the elves. Okay, next question. Okay, so here's a question about the Palantir. If a random elf on Tol Eressëa saw through the Master Palantir, and Sauron happened to look through the Ithilstone at the same time, what would happen? Could the elf have fought off Sauron, assuming the stones could still contact each other? So, luckily, the Master Stone could never contact the Ithilstone. Some believe that the Master Stone could not communicate with Middle-earth at all, as it was never mentioned that it did. It was designed to contact Numenor. But there is an exception to this, the Elostirian Stone, which was housed in a tower just to the west of the Shire. Elendil used this stone to contact Eressëa, and he also used it to confirm that Numenor was really gone. He could no longer view Avalone in it. During the Third Age, the stone was kept in this tower, and its warden was Círdan, who likely brought it to the west when he finally departed in the Fourth Age. The Elostirian Stone was said to not be able to contact any of the other stones, only the Master Stone. So it is likely that if any elf in Tol Eressëa happened to look into the Master Stone and they saw anybody, it wouldn't be Sauron, it would be Círdan. Okay, next question. Okay, here is the one from the thumbnail. Is there any information from Tolkien about Gandalf's age or how long he has been alive? So imagine for just a brief moment that Gandalf has filled out a form for you, and he hands it to you, and all the information is filled out, and you notice something strange. Under age, he doesn't put a number, but a curious little symbol. An infinity symbol. And the picture of his ID does not look like the old man that's looking at you but puffing away at his pipe, but he looks more like this. Gandalf's not human. He is not a man, he is not an elf, and he was not born in the world. He is something entirely different. He is of the Ainur. The Ainur were the first beings that God created before there was even a universe or a concept of time. Gandalf is essentially an angel. So due to his angelic nature and the fact that he's from beyond the stars and that he existed before the universe or before time existed, you cannot give Gandalf an age. He is eternal. He is timeless. One may argue that you can give an age to his incarnated form, which arrived in Middle-earth in 1000 of the Third Age, but that's just a temporary body that he has bonded to until his task is complete. Due to the nature of Tolkien's creation myth, all of the Ainur had a hand in the creation of the universe, so parts of the world are of his own thought, and his voice is one of the voices of creation. All of the wizards are Ainur, like Gandalf, specifically from the lesser order of Ainur called the Maiar, just like Sauron, who is a fallen angel that served the satanic figure Morgoth. Okay, next question. Okay, here's a question that came in by the request of Brandon Waugh, I hope I'm saying it right, who asks, why did Frodo not notice that Gandalf and Elrond had rings of power? Basically because the rings were invisible, unless the bearer chooses to reveal them. When Frodo met Galadriel, he could not see her ring initially, her ring Nenya, until she chose to reveal it to him. She held her hand up with the star of Eärendil behind her hand, and she showed him the ring. And after revealing it, it was still only visible to Frodo. Sam was there, but Sam stated that he could not see the ring. He could see the star of Eärendil, but he could not see Nenya. So the reason that Frodo could not see Narya or Vilya, Narya was of course held by Gandalf and Vilya by Elrond, was because neither Gandalf nor Elrond chose to reveal it to him. He did see them at the very end of the story, at the Grey Havens, as well as Narya, and everybody at this point was able to see the rings because they had lost their power. Okay, next question. Okay, here's another question from Bonazir, who asks, What were Amandil's intentions? He says that he'll sail west for Earendil-like reasons, but are we supposed to believe him? Or was the Númenórean ideology and the rhetoric of immortality secretly getting to him? Subconsciously, maybe. Good question. I believe that his intentions were pure. Whatever came of him, his intentions were pure. We don't know what happened to Amandil. He might have found Valinor and spoken with Manwë, or maybe not. He might have wound up in Mandos until his time is up. He might have shipwrecked. We don't know. I believe that his intentions were what he said they were. He had, as you say, Earendil reasons for sailing to the west. Of course, he was less successful than Earendil was. Númenor was too far fallen to be saved. They were already kind of evil before Sauron came and got them into Melkorism, which is Satan worship and human sacrifice. Amandil, however, he was one of the faithful. And going off to what would surely be his death, or at least something that he was never going to return in his life, it was a very brave act, and I think that if he had let the unfaithful get to him and the rhetoric and everything, he might as well just have gone with Pharazôn instead of going on his own like that. Okay, next question. Okay, here's another Saruman question. In The Lord of the Rings, what would happen if Saruman and Gríma Wormtongue had not been killed and wandered into the lands east of Dale and Mordor and became allies with the Easterling tribes ruling them? I don't see it happening, to be honest with you. I really don't see that happening, and I'll give you two reasons why. The first is that Gríma was just eventually going to snap, and he was going to kill Saruman. He did so in the Shire because Frodo had offered him a way out. He offered him a place to stay. And Saruman told vicious lies about Gríma eating hobbits. It was just too much for him. Saruman's constant abuse was going to get him killed eventually. The second thing is that the Easterlings would not tolerate Saruman's presence. They don't like Sauron. They were not willing soldiers in his armies. They were conscripted by conquest. This is why, as soon as Sauron's power broke, they just dropped their weapons and went home. They have families. They have lives. They don't want this war. They don't want anything to do with Sauron, and they don't want anything to do with anyone associated with Sauron, and that would include Saruman. Okay, next question. I told you I got a lot of Saruman questions, and here's another one. In The Lord of the Rings, what would happen to Saruman and Gríma if they survived and went to Mirkwood Forest and encountered Radagast the Brown or the elves there who did not know about their treason? Once again, I don't see it happening. Radagast wasn't around, and the elves were all aware of his treason. Radagast had gone from Mirkwood. He wasn't ever seen again. He had moved and not exactly left a forwarding address. Elrond sent people looking for him, but they never found him. The elves of Mirkwood would well be aware of Saruman because their prince, Legolas, would report to them, as would Celeborn, who had taken a part of Mirkwood, which was now called the Forest of Green Leaves, for himself. The safest place that Saruman could have gone if he had survived would actually be Mordor, because Sauron was gone, and Aragorn was leaving it alone as long as no one there stirred up any trouble. Okay, next question. Okay, here's a question that came in from Eric Miraz, who asks, did Isildur usurp Ilúvatar's gift to man by holding the dead men of Dunharrow to their oaths? No. Isildur doesn't have the power or the authority to do that. He's not a necromancer. He's a mortal man. He's not a sorcerer of any kind. He has no power to bind the men of Dunharrow to the world beyond their deaths. The oath that they swore was an oath to Ilúvatar, and it was Ilúvatar, God himself, that held them to their world. This is similar to the oath taken by Fëanor and his sons. They were compelled to fulfill it, even as some repented their actions. Ilúvatar takes such a promise very seriously, and all who make such pacts shall see the full consequences of doing so. Basically, and this was something that was submitted in a comment by Rashavia Berman, who says, this is basically Ilúvatar saying, you will not take my name in vain. So it didn't have much to do with Isildur, it had to do with the oath they swore before the One. Okay, next question. Okay, let's see. Who did Sauron directly fight during his life? There were not a lot of examples of Sauron engaging in personal combat, but here's the ones that we know about. In Beren and Luthien, Sauron fought Huan. This was a loss. He thought that he could skirt past the prophecy, which stated that only the greatest werewolf could kill Huan, and he thought he could just become a werewolf himself and do it. It didn't work, and he had to surrender to Luthien. In the same story, he also fought Finrod Felagund in a magical battle. They used singing, which is the most powerful magic. It's the same magic that created the universe, and Sauron won. He killed Finrod. Finrod was powerful, but Sauron was one of the angels that sung the universe into existence, or at least sung the design for it, which Ilúvatar used the secret fire to bring it to life. At the end of the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power in the Third Age, Sauron fought Elendil and Gil-galad. All three died, though of course Sauron and Gil-galad could not truly die. Sauron had a setback, and Gil-galad would get shunted to Mandos. And that's really it. Sauron was more of a strategist. He was a sorcerer, he was an inventor, he was a torturer. He didn't engage in direct combat very often. Okay, next question. What is your interpretation of what happened to Frodo after he left Middle-earth at the end of The Lord of the Rings? Did he return to his home in Crickhollow, or did he go somewhere else? Odd question. There's no interpretation to be had. We know where he went, and it was not to Crickhollow. Frodo had a house in Crickhollow, but he never returned to it after the war. He got Bag End back, and he stayed there. Lobelia gave him Bag End back as a gesture of goodwill. And she also left all her money to Frodo. She was at the end of her life, and they had come to an understanding. And she gave him all of her money so that he could help all the hobbits who lost their homes in the Battle of Bywater. Frodo was the deputy mayor for a small amount of time, and then after that he sailed to the west with Bilbo and Gandalf and Galadriel and Elrond. He would spend the rest of his life with the elves and the Ainur. Okay. Last question. In The Hobbit, if Gandalf had convinced Saruman to go to the Lonely Mountain, could Saruman have used his voice to convince Smaug to leave and go somewhere else, or match his power with a dragon? No, definitely not at all. To me, there's nothing in the Legendarium that gets overrated more than Saruman's voice. Maybe also Calagon's size. He has a voice that can charm and convince others. This does not mean that he has the voice of God. It does not mean that he could command a dragon. That would be ridiculous. I'm going to give you a brief list of characters that we know for certain resisted his voice in The Lord of the Rings. Gandalf, Theoden, Gimli, Legolas, Merry, Pippin, Frodo, Sam, and Sauron. Now, no, a lot of these are hobbits. When Frodo warned the hobbits of the Shire about his voice, he stated that it really doesn't have power if you're guarded against it, if you're aware of it. Some of the Rohirrim and Treebeard certainly fell victim to his charisma. But there's a thing about the charismatic voice. Smaug actually has the same power. Smaug almost had Bilbo convinced that Thorin was going to cut him out of the treasure. And it took the dwarves a little while to convince Bilbo that they weren't out to rip him off. Smaug and Saruman wouldn't be able to do much to each other with words. It would be just a pointless argument. Okay, well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I've enjoyed answering these questions. This was a fun one for me. Like I said, if you have questions, you can leave comments. I try to get to those. If you want to be featured in a video, or if you feel your question is too long for YouTube, just go to my Quora account. There is a link in the description. Click that. Ask me a question. Some people have said that they were a little bit confused about how that works. Really, if you ask any question about the Legendarium on there, my name will come up as somebody that you can request from. If you're having any kind of difficulty, leave me a comment or send me a message giving me the question's address. Sometimes I do choose not to answer questions that come through, and it's usually because I just answered the same question. So if you ask me something and I did not answer it, it might have been because multiple people asked the same question and I didn't spam it by answering every single one. I would just answer the first instance of it that I came across, because when I answer a question, I kind of think of there as being a cooldown period before I'll address the exact same question again. Like, I've done the eagle question maybe about 4 or 5 times on Quora. It comes through a lot more than 4 or 5 times, but I've done it a few times. So anyway, if you got to the end of the video and you haven't subscribed already, well, why not? If you got to the end of the video, you must enjoy it. So please click the subscribe. Please click the bell. Click the like button too. That also helps with the algorithm. And we'll see you guys next time.